Gerald had always been a quiet man, content with the steady rhythm of his days. At 74, he found comfort in routines: morning tea, a crossword puzzle, and soft classical music playing in the background. But lately, things had begun to slip. He would walk into the kitchen and forget why. Names of acquaintances escaped him. Once a reliable storyteller, he now stumbled over details. At first he brushed it off as aging, but a part of him felt uneasy. It was his niece, Emily, who gently nudged him one Sunday afternoon. "Uncle Gerald," she said, her voice kind but firm, "you've always loved nature. Why not start walking? Again? Just a bit each day." Gerald hesitated. The thought of strenuous exercise made him uncomfortable. Gyms were foreign territory, filled with machines and mirrors he had no interest in. But walking, that felt different. That evening, wrapped in his old overcoat, he stepped outside and took his first walk around the block in months. The air was crisp, and the early evening light cast golden shadows on the pavement. With each step, Gerald began noticing the world. Again, the smell of pine from a neighbor's yard, a cat stretched on a fence, the crunch of leaves underfoot. He returned home flushed and oddly lighter, as though a fog had lifted. The next day, he walked a little farther. A week later, he was strolling through the park for half an hour, nodding to familiar faces and rediscovering the rhythm of his breath. He felt more alert, more grounded. Even his sleep improved. Small details started returning to him. The author of a book he'd loved in his 20s, the taste of his late wife's plum jam, the exact spot where he used to sit by the lake. Gerald didn't need to read scientific journals to understand what was happening, but the research was clear. Regular movement increases oxygen flow to the brain, stimulating the growth of new connections between neurons. Aerobic activity, even something as simple as walking, can reduce the risk of cognitive decline by up to 30%. More importantly, it doesn't have to be intense, just consistent. One morning, while tying his shoes, Gerald smiled to himself. He wasn't chasing youth. He was nurturing something quieter, more precious: his clarity, his memories, his presence. Walking had become more than a habit. It was a gentle act of care. In every step, he was reclaiming his connection to the world and to himself. Margaret had always prided herself on being a good cook. Her kitchen, warm and sunlit, had seen decades of Sunday roasts, garden salads, and fresh loaves of bread cooling on the counter. But after turning 75, she noticed that her energy dipped more often, and sometimes she struggled to focus on recipes she once knew by heart. At first, she thought it was just fatigue. Then her doctor gently pointed out something else. "Margaret, your diet may need some adjusting. Your brain needs better fuel." That sentence stuck with her. She began reading about brain health and quickly came across the Mind Diet, a combination of the Mediterranean and DASH diets, specifically designed to support memory and cognitive function. It wasn't about strict rules or tasteless meals. It was about nourishing herself wisely. She started small. At the farmer's market, she chose dark leafy greens instead of iceberg lettuce, added blueberries to her morning oatmeal, and swapped her usual white bread for whole grain. Instead of frying fish, she grilled salmon with olive oil and herbs. Walnuts became her afternoon snack, replacing the buttery biscuits she used to love. At first, she missed the richness of old comfort foods, but the bright flavors of fresh produce and spices brought a new joy to her meals. Margaret noticed more than just physical improvements. She felt mentally sharper, less foggy, more alert. Reading her book club novel became easier. Remembering phone numbers, dates, and details From conversations felt more natural again. She even started experimenting with new recipes, turning cooking into a playful challenge instead of a chore. The science supported what she was experiencing. Diets rich in vegetables, berries, nuts, whole grains, fish, and healthy fats reduce inflammation, protect blood vessels, and slow the accumulation of harmful proteins in the brain. Omega-3 fatty acids from fatty fish support neuron structure. Antioxidants found in colorful fruits and vegetables combat oxidative stress, a known factor in cognitive decline. B vitamins from legumes and leafy greens help regulate brain function. And energy metabolism. Margaret also paid attention to how she ate. No more rushed meals in front of the television. She set the table, chewed slowly, and enjoyed each bite. She kept a glass of water by her side, understanding now that dehydration could affect focus and mood. Her plates followed the healthy plate principle. Half vegetables, a quarter lean protein, a quarter complex carbs. Looking back, Margaret didn't feel like she had given anything up. Instead, she had rediscovered food as a source of strength for her body, her spirit, and her mind. Each meal became an act of care, a promise to herself to live well, think clearly, and savor life with grace. For Leonard, visits to the doctor had always been brief formalities. Quick checkups, a firm handshake, and polite goodbyes. At 78, he still walked with purpose and kept his wits sharp, or so he believed. But one winter afternoon, while struggling to recall the name of an old colleague, he paused. The memory was right there, hovering on the edge, but refused to come. It unsettled him more than he expected. Later that month, during a routine appointment, his doctor brought up something Leonard hadn't considered seriously. "You're managing your blood pressure and cholesterol, right? These things matter for your brain as much as your heart." That conversation opened his eyes. He had always separated physical health from mental sharpness, never realizing how tightly they were connected. His blood pressure had been slightly elevated for years, and while he took his medication, he wasn't consistent. His blood sugar had been borderline for a while, and he carried a little more weight than he liked to admit. But dementia? That had never crossed his mind. Back home, Leonard began reading. The link between heart health and brain health was clearer than he imagined. High blood pressure, diabetes, high cholesterol, all could damage blood vessels, including those in the brain. Poor circulation meant less oxygen reaching neurons. Over time, this could lead to memory loss, confusion, and even dementia. 1. Studies showed that diabetes nearly doubled the risk of cognitive decline. Determined not to be caught off guard, Leonard took action. He bought a simple digital monitor and began tracking his blood pressure daily. He adjusted his diet, reducing salt and processed foods. He measured his blood sugar and began walking more regularly, inspired by a friend who had reversed his prediabetes with exercise. He even lost a few pounds, not through drastic measures, but through consistent, mindful effort. He also made sleep a priority. After learning that poor sleep could worsen blood sugar control and blood pressure, he set a regular bedtime, turned off screens an hour before, and created a calming bedtime routine. For the first time in years, he felt rested. In the morning, what surprised Leonard most was how empowered he felt. Caring for his health wasn't about fear. It was about taking responsibility for his future. The fog that once crept into his thinking began to lift. He felt steadier, more alert, more confident in his body and mind. Leonard no longer saw doctor visits as chores. They were check-ins on a promise he had made to himself, to stay present, active, and in control. By caring for his body, he was protecting his most precious asset, his mind. Diana had never considered herself especially academic. She raised 3 children, worked in a small florist shop, and spent most evenings with her knitting or a good book. But after turning 76, she noticed that her mind sometimes felt sluggish. Names escaped her, shopping lists vanished from memory, and even familiar streets felt oddly unfamiliar. Her granddaughter, Anna, noticed the change and made a gentle suggestion. "Grandma, want to try doing a puzzle with me?" It started as a fun way to pass the time. They tackled a jigsaw puzzle together on the dining room table, then moved on to crosswords, and later, simple logic games. At first, Diana found herself frustrated. How could something so small make her feel so challenged? But slowly, she began to look forward to the mental stretch. Each clue solved, each piece placed, felt like a small victory. It wasn't just entertainment. It was exercise for her brain. Encouraged, Diana expanded her efforts. She began keeping a journal, writing a paragraph each morning about something that made her smile. She watched foreign films with subtitles to get a feel for different languages. She borrowed a book on art history from the library, and though the names and dates were difficult at first, she persisted, underlining passages that sparked her curiosity. What Diana discovered was more than cognitive clarity. She felt reconnected to her curiosity, her confidence, and her joy in learning. Her memory sharpened, but so did her attention and mood. Conversations flowed more naturally. She even felt braver when talking with new people, unafraid of forgetting words or losing her train of thought. The science behind her progress was reassuring. The brain, it turns out, thrives on novelty and challenge. This ability, called neuroplasticity, allows it to adapt, reorganize, and even grow new connections well into old age. Each time Diana tried something unfamiliar or complex, she was helping. Her neurons communicate more effectively. Experts recommend at least 20 minutes a day of focused cognitive activity. Reading, writing, problem-solving, or learning a new skill. Even changing daily routines, like brushing teeth with the non-dominant hand or taking a different route on a walk, stimulates the brain. It's not about perfection or speed, it's about engagement and consistency. Diana began to view her brain like a garden, something that needed care, sunlight, and stimulation. With each day of gentle mental effort, she noticed herself blooming. She wasn't chasing the person she used to be. She was becoming someone even more aware, more vibrant, and more alive. Not in spite of her age, but because of how she chose to live it. For Norman, retirement came with a kind of silence he hadn't expected. After 40 years as a school principal, his days had been filled with voices, decisions, and a steady rhythm of purpose. But now, at 80, the phone rarely rang. His daughter lived abroad, his friends had moved or passed on, and most days were spent in quiet company with the radio and his old dog, Jasper. He told himself he didn't mind. He liked the peace, or so he thought. One gray afternoon, while shopping for groceries, Norman saw a notice on the bulletin board. Community choir, all ages welcome. He paused, reading the faded flyer twice. He hadn't sung in a group since college, but something about the idea tugged at him. That evening, he called the number. The next week, he walked into a small hall filled with laughter, piano chords, and unfamiliar faces. He was nervous at first. But when the choir began warming up, something stirred in him. Singing with others, harmonizing, laughing at missed notes, sharing a rhythm, felt like coming home. After the first rehearsal, He lingered, chatting with a woman named Elaine about their favorite composers. It was the first meaningful conversation he'd had in weeks. Soon, the rehearsals became a lifeline. He began arriving early, staying late, and even joining the group for tea afterward. They talked about music, family, memories, and books. He wasn't just keeping busy, he was connecting. And with each rehearsal, he felt sharper, more present. Names stuck more easily, thoughts flowed more freely, and his spirits lifted. Social engagement, Norman later learned, is one of the most powerful protectors of cognitive health. Loneliness, by contrast, is a serious risk factor. It increases the chances of dementia by up to 50%. The brain is wired for connection. Every conversation, every shared laugh, activates regions tied to memory, emotion, and executive function. Norman also began volunteering at the library, reading stories to children. Their curiosity and energy were contagious. He found himself smiling more, even singing at home with Jasper as his only audience. Not everyone has a choir nearby, he knew, but connection comes in many forms. A neighborly chat, a phone call with an old friend, a letter to a sibling. Even video calls with his granddaughter became weekly rituals, brightening them both. Norman no longer feared the quiet, because now he had woven threads of connection into his life again. And in those threads, strong and warm, his mind found clarity, comfort, and belonging. Elaine had always been an early riser. Even in retirement, her mornings began before dawn with a cup of chamomile tea and a look out the window at her quiet street. But lately, the peaceful ritual had changed. She woke up feeling groggy, her thoughts cloudy, her energy low. Throughout the day, she caught herself forgetting words mid-sentence or rereading the same page in her book. She brushed it off as just aging until her doctor asked, "How well are you sleeping, Elaine?" The question surprised her. She hadn't really thought about sleep. It was just something that happened when the day ended. But when she began paying attention, she noticed the truth. She was getting by on 5 or 6 hours a night, often interrupted by tossing and turning, or waking up for no clear reason. Curious and a bit concerned, Elaine began reading about sleep and the brain. What she found startled her. Sleep wasn't a passive process. It was vital maintenance. During deep sleep, the brain cleared away waste products, including amyloid, a protein linked to Alzheimer's disease. Memory consolidation also happened while sleeping, transforming short-term experiences into long-term knowledge. Poor sleep, she learned, didn't just make her tired, it impaired concentration, mood, and long-term cognitive health. Elaine decided to treat sleep as seriously as her diet or exercise. First, she set a regular bedtime and wake time, even on weekends. She dimmed the lights in the evening and switched off her television earlier. Instead of watching news before bed, which often left her anxious, she started reading gentle fiction or listening to calming music. She stopped drinking tea late in the day and replaced her nightcap with warm milk. She also made changes to her bedroom. Out went the bright clock that glowed all night. She bought heavier curtains to block early light and began ventilating the room each evening. Soon, sleep came easier. She still woke up occasionally, but fell back asleep quickly. Most importantly, she began feeling rested again, not just in body, but in mind. Within weeks, her thinking grew clearer. Her memory improved, her mood stabilized, and her energy returned. She found herself engaging more in conversations and feeling less overwhelmed by tasks. It was as if a fog had lifted. Elaine no longer treated sleep as optional. She viewed it as sacred. A time when her brain healed, sorted, and restored itself. And in giving her sleep the care it deserved, she gave her mind the gift of renewal. The nights no longer felt restless. They felt like peace and promise. Victor had always thought of himself as a creature of habit. A glass of wine with dinner, a cigarette now and then, hours spent on the couch watching his favorite detective shows. At 81, he told himself he'd earned the right to relax. "What harm can it do now?" he often muttered with a grin. But deep down, he knew something wasn't quite right. He found himself more forgetful. He struggled to follow the plot lines of those very shows he once enjoyed. He misplaced things more often and grew impatient with conversations. His daughter, Laura, noticed too. During one visit, she said gently, "Dad, you've been slowing down a lot. Maybe it's time to think about what's still in your control." The words stayed with him. That night, Victor looked at the cigarette burning in the ashtray, the second glass of wine untouched, and the flickering TV screen. For the first time, he wondered whether these old comforts were quietly stealing something precious. His clarity, his independence. He began making small changes. He swapped wine for herbal tea, not every night, but often enough to feel the difference. He tossed out the cigarettes and bought peppermints to keep his hands busy. Instead of staying on the couch all evening, he began stretching while watching TV, then walking around the block during commercial breaks. At first, it felt like a loss, but soon he noticed subtle shifts. He woke up feeling less foggy. He could hold a thought longer, remember appointments, and even found joy in old hobbies, like woodworking. His hands steadied, and his mind followed. Victor later read what science had long confirmed. Harmful habits, especially smoking and excessive drinking, shrink the brain and damage blood vessels. Processed foods and sugar increase inflammation and accelerate aging. Sedentary behavior reduces brain stimulation and slows mental function. Every indulgence, once harmless seeming, had cumulative effects. But he also learned this: it's never too late. The brain is resilient. Positive changes, even in late life, can lead to better focus, mood, and memory. Replacing harmful routines with healthy ones doesn't require perfection, just persistence. He leaned on support when needed. His doctor guided him. Laura cheered him on. He joined a local wellness group where others his age shared their struggles and triumphs. Together, they encouraged each other through setbacks and celebrated small victories. Victor came to understand that caring for the mind isn't about denial. It's about choosing what nourishes instead of what numbs. Each better choice became an act of respect toward himself. And with every habit he left behind, he made space for something far more valuable: a clearer, brighter, more connected life.